Welcome back to our verse-by-verse study on the book of Galatians. I'm glad you're here. We start chapter 2 today in a very interesting section on the history of Paul, of his apostleship. For an epistle, otherwise a letter from this apostle, the apostles led the church, for a letter from the apostle to a church to spend so much time on something historical is unique in the epistles itself. And why would Paul do this? Well, we've learned so far that the Galatians were people who seem to be struggling with their Christian walk, wanting to return to Jewish-based legalism after being saved by grace. So Paul is writing principally in Galatians to correct them and to realize that Jesus Christ not only is sufficient for salvation, but the grace of God for a Christian walk in life. And to do that, he's starting out reminding the Galatians of his apostleship. And otherwise, he holds the authority over them as the messenger of God through Christ to the second generation Christians beyond, including the Galatians. So he's firming up his argument by reminding them of his authority really from the middle of, early in chapter 1 to the middle of chapter 2. So we talked last week how Paul was converted in Damascus, and combining with Acts 9 and here the best early histories of Paul before his missionary journeys, beginning in Acts 13. And from there, he was, after being taken to Damascus, he began his ministry in the synagogues. He was then escaped Damascus because of persecution and went into the desert for 3 years. Here, there was a hint last week we read that perhaps this is when he was taught by Christ himself, certifying his apostleship, because all the apostles, 12 apostles, the leaders of the early church, were taught by Christ himself. From there, then, he was sent. He went to Jerusalem and introduced himself to the apostles, and from there was sent away, again, probably for his own safety, to Southeast Asia Minor, his home city of Tarsus and the areas around there. So we pick up this week in first verse of chapter 2, then 14 years after, I went up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas and took Titus with me. So suddenly there's a gap of 14 years, and which probably leads us up to around 50 AD or 49 AD. It's a little controversial. Paul was probably converted in the middle of 30s AD. Again, we don't know the precise date. What was he doing for the 14 years? Well, we don't know. There's a hint here because he told them he was preaching among the Gentiles. My guess is he was not inactive for 14 years. He was out spreading the gospel among the Gentiles, probably in Southeast Asia Minor. But again, we don't know for sure. So he went up by revelation, the word here in the original Greek language, epikalupsis, where we get the apocalypse, that word, revelation, the last book of the Bible by John, the Revelation of John, same word. God led him basically by revealing it to him. He should go and communicate unto them that the gospel which I preached among the Gentiles, but privately to them which were of reputation, lest by any means I should run or had run in vain. So what is this saying? So God wanted him to go to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is at this point the head church of the universal church, and probably led by James. And so he went to them and back to them to communicate with them that he had been spreading the gospel. And he was going to them of reputation, otherwise, literally in the Greek, the thinking ones, otherwise the ones who could comprehend what he was saying and what he was trying to communicate. How it's interpreted is a little controversial, but I think he went to the leaders of the church basically to confirm how he was teaching the gospel, in that that the Gentiles did not need to believe in legalism or follow the Jewish law. They were free from that. There's the liberty of knowing that a person is saved by grace alone. They're regenerated. They have the Holy Spirit. There's no need to follow the law. As it says in Romans 10:4, the law is dead. So it's no longer in effect, basically. So he then says, but Titus, who is a Gentile, who was maybe being a Greek, was compelled to be circumcised, which was resisted because Paul basically was saying Titus, being a Christian, does not follow the law. So this is occurring most likely at the Jerusalem Council, also reported in Acts 15, which was where the whole status of legalism was decided. And ultimately, all the disciples or the apostles were convinced that we did not need to follow the law, that we basically obeyed the apostles' word that they received from Christ, which is put down in the epistles, the letters from Romans to Revelation 3. As a key point, a key turning point in Christianity to clarify that point. So the Jerusalem Council in 49 AD or 50 AD, in Acts 15 and here in Galatians 2, clarified that point that we're not bound to the law, we're not bound to legalism. So great news for us. Okay, so we'll continue on with Paul's history just after this, up to the middle of the chapter, and also discussing some argument or discussion, I should say, between Peter and Paul in Antioch, probably just after the Jerusalem Council. Thank you for joining me today. I'll look forward to seeing you next time.